So, global warming, it's in the news from time to time, in and out, all sorts of things going on with it. Why don't people believe in it? That's a question that's everyone, we want to take a stand on it, we want to argue about it. We don't want to discuss why other people disagree with us on it. We just, point the finger and say they're wrong. So I'd like to, as someone, like, I, I believe something's going on with the climate. Yes, I don't believe the doom and gloom scenarios, and that's, I think, the big issue no one wants to look at is what's going on with, the fear of it. Um, so I've worked in the academic world for several years. I know scientists who specifically studied global warming. Um, People have traveled to, remote parts of the world and actually bored out core samples for study, ice samples and everything that, goes on with global warming studies. And they are remarkably quiet on the subject. The people, we want to talk, all these scientists believe in global warming. And yeah, scientists do, and these people who do these studies do. But when it comes to the doom and gloom scenarios and, shaking their fist and yelling, we have to do something about it, the scientists who actually study global warming don't participate in that as much. Very few of them do. Because, the science, the science says something's going on, but the science isn't as definite about what's going on as everyone else says it is. Politicians, the media, social activists, whatever, when they start talking about science, they step beyond what science is actually saying. So what generally happens is someone does, a few people do some studies, they publish papers on their findings. Someone who is interested in global science but doesn't really study it reads their papers, sees a trend going on, and decides to hold a conference. And so now we have these people keep it together. They discuss the papers they wrote. They make some agreements, they make other agreements. Not everything they say is interconnected. So, yes, we have proof that this is going on, but we don't have proof that that means that this is going to happen in the future. However, the guy who arranged the conference, who is not really a global scientist himself, might be a scientist, but doesn't really study global science to the same extent as the people who he's having present, takes all their data, puts it together in his scenario, and because he's being more vocal about it than the guys who do the actual studies, the media picks up on it and says, oh, this must be what's going on. And so the media is partially to blame. These organizers are partially to blame. Politicians, activists, they pick up on it and they talk about it. And again, some of the activists are interested in science. They aren't scientists either. Every real scientist believes that no, scientists disagree with each other. Anyone who says every real scientist believes such and such probably doesn't understand science at all. So what is global warming? I mean, that's one of the weird things is, the average temperature of the Earth is rising. Okay, believable. And, we've been measuring that for maybe 50 to 60 years. No, we've been doing this since the 1880s. Not really. So probably the earliest meteorologists were ship captains. Go outside, a storm's coming. You can tell there are changes in the atmosphere. You can actually feel the pressure change. You can feel the temperature change. And captain of a ship, naturally, it's in his best interest to be able to predict storms. So when they did their navigational sightings, they would take temperature readings and barometer, barometric pressure readings and stuff like that, and they'd record those. So we have, going back to the 1880s, we have records of temperatures around the world. Britannia rules the waves, so it actually became policy for British naval captains to keep records of this stuff. Just because, the British Navy wanted data that they could collect and better learn things so that they could continue to rule the waves. Now the thing about that is, so people say we've been collecting data since the 1880s. The data we've been collecting, it's mostly been in the shipping lanes. It hasn't been in the same place day after day. It's not like, today we have a weather station in this location and it collects data automatically and it sends it to Washington or wherever, and we have a daily list of the temperatures at various times during the day for the past 50 years or whatever. The British Navy, when they were taking temperature, they were taking it where they were at, which means that some days we would go for, or sometimes we might go for a few months without getting a temperature reading at this location because no ships were there. Most of our readings came from the shipping lanes because that's where the ships were most of the time. So we weren't getting global readings, we weren't getting consistent readings. We can still use the data they collected, but it wasn't as scientific as, when we say we do a scientific study, it wasn't as well collected as we would in a modern day study. Using that data and then incorporating more data as we started to collect it was in itself a non-scientific thing to do, because now we're getting data from locations we didn't get data from 100 years ago, and we're trying to say, yes, this is all part of the same study, and it's part of the same global system, yes, but we can't extrapolate backward and say, well, this year, when we started our studies in the 50s, we got this temperature reading, and so we're going to extrapolate back and say that 100 years before that, we would have gotten this reading. So, again, like I said, the data collecting is good, but comparing all the data with data that existed before we started collecting data from a certain site isn't necessarily the most scientific thing to do. Now, from the data, looking up online, the temperature has increased the average temperature has increased by 1.1 degrees Celsius or 1.9 degrees Fahrenheit since the 1880s. Now, again, I repeat, this isn't necessarily a great study because we're comparing temperatures from, scattered about the globe to more, recent temperatures, which were more, scientifically taken. And we're trying to combine them into one big group of data points, which, we've got to be careful doing that. Like I said, it's not 100% unscientific, but we have to be more careful when we do that because we have to acknowledge that the data was not collected the same way throughout the study, if we're going to call it a study. So, 1.9 degrees, I'm in America, so I do things by Fahrenheit usually, over 230 years doesn't seem like a huge leap. Has it been consistently increasing? Yes. Is it even a trend? In geological terms, 200 years isn't a super trend. It's it can be the start of a trend, maybe. I'll give you that much. But is it a trend of and by itself? And my answer to that would be maybe not. Maybe so. We're sort of at the borderline where we can start calling it a trend, or it still might not be a trend, in my opinion. I'm not a global scientist, but again, people who have studied the Earth and know that it's been around millions of years, and that's what we base everything on, have to step up and admit, yeah, this could just be a small hiccup, or it could be the start of a trend. Now, that said, so now we start to get into the non-scientists, though. And so, local temperature. So we've had this summer has been hotter than normal for Columbus, Ohio. Yes. The past few summers have been cooler than they were when I grew up. When I was a kid, it would get up into the hundreds for at least 2 or 3 weeks during the year. The past few years, it barely got in the 90s for 2 or 3 weeks during the year. Again, talking Fahrenheit here. Point this out to a global scientist activist or global warming activist, and they'll say that's not what global warming really means. Global warming means this. You're oversimplifying global warming. Okay, I accept that's possible. However, we've been having cooler summers. We've also been having warmer winters. So you just happened to mention, last time, I remember growing up, we'd have snow winter round, and now it seems like we go only through 2 or 3 weeks of snow. And the climate change activist will jump up and point, global warming, that's proof. Well, but if that's proof of global warming because we're having warmer winters, then why isn't it proof against global warming when we have cooler summers? That's not what global warming means in the summertime, but it is what global warming means in the wintertime. So again, a lot of the activists and the people who don't really understand science as well as they say they do, who want to push global warming down everyone's throat, they contradict themselves when it comes to their terms. And so I'm not going to take you as seriously if you're using a double standard for what counts as global warming and what doesn't. And we jump back and forth between global warming and climate change because whenever there is a show of, last winter was warmer than the winter before that. Global warming, because that is a warming trend. When I talk about, last summer was cooler than last summer, climate change, because that's not global warming. It's not warmer, so we're going to use the term climate change. And we jump back and forth between climate change and global warming when it's convenient for the activists to use a certain term. And so, us non-activists look at this and we say, you're full of BS and we don't believe you because you're jumping around on your terms. When it gets to the actual scientific stuff, the actual research papers, we don't have access to most of those. I tried to look up online, what are the data points? What were the temperature lists? I couldn't find them anywhere online because that's not for me to know. That is for the experts who study this stuff to know. And yes, it may prove global warming, it may not, but I don't have I can't make my opinion based on the data points. I have to make my opinion based on someone else's opinion of the data points. And that's always going to make me a little curious, a little suspicious of what's going on. Just because, it's just data. It's not like I'm going to steal your data points and, other scientists might do this, but scientists are supposed to share their findings, aren't they? That's sort of what I hear. This whole idea that we have every real scientist believes in global warming sort of lends itself to the theory that every real scientist is sharing their data with other real scientists. And apparently that's not the case so much as people would have us believe. Then we get to the people like Al Gore. And we have an inconvenient proof, or an An Inconvenient Truth. And I never watched the movie, had no interest in it. I do know most of the trailers for the movie. It was largely, there are a lot of scenes of ice collapsing. Here down in the Antarctic, and here's a film of ice breaking up. Okay, how do we know that hasn't been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years? During, we know places where people live, Alaska, stuff like that. During the spring, there is a thaw, and, the ice cracks. There are avalanches. There are, whatever. How do we know that is not what is happening down in Antarctica? And these films, the films don't have date stamps on them, so maybe this is just what happens during the springtime in Antarctica. I don't know. Well, here's an idea. Give me a science grant. I'll go down there. I will film the ice breaking for about 20 years. We will compare my films, and we will, decide, is it breaking up more as time goes on, or is it breaking up less or at the same rate or whatever? Now, making that suggestion, people would look at this and say, that's not science. And yeah, I agree, it might not be science. But if that's not science, then Al Gore's films of ice breaking up as proof of an inconvenient truth is also not science. And if you want to just keep showing me these videos with no reference to go on and just say, breaking up ice, proof of global warming, I'm not going to believe you, because it's no more scientific than if I actually tried to do a scientific experiment, filming the breakup of the ice year after year. I mean, my last video I made was about hippos attacking, and I looked up online and found videos of hippos attacking people. Do I, by the same reasons as Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, do I have proof that hippos are dangerous creatures that need to be destroyed because I have found pictures of them attacking people? No. And so we get to the doom and gloom scenario. We were supposed to be, I think Florida was supposed to be half underwater by the 1970s, according to a prediction from the 1950s. And, you can find online lists of predictions people have made about, timelines showing we should be underwater at this point, and this flooding should happen, stuff that never happened because, based on the trend, this is supposed to happen. And global warming advocates will come up and say, well, you don't understand how science works. Scientists, as they make new discoveries, they change their findings. Or they change their, and I believe that. I believe that entirely. And quote-unquote, real scientists would also believe that. So, quote-unquote, real scientists want to predict these gloom and doom scenarios because they know that it might all change tomorrow. And the people who do, actually study this stuff and publish papers on it, they might make a comment, if this trend continues, then we will be underwater by such and such a year. They might make a comment like that. But it's usually phrased in such a way as, we're not sure this trend will continue, so this is just sort of still guesswork on our part. But the activists read the article and they ignore the word if. And so suddenly we have people believing, yes, we are going to be underwater by, I think by 2040, Washington, D.C. is supposed to be underwater, I think, by the last thing I saw. I don't expect it to really happen. Because, again, this is the same prediction they've been making for years. So, back to the original. Why don't, I'm not trying to convince people that there is no global warming or that there isn't any climate change. I'm just trying to convince people that the fear-mongering and the people who want to get into our lives and try to control our lives because of their fear of global warming are not the scientific people we should be listening to. Sure, we should. No, I believe in taking care of the environment. I don't believe in making changes based on predictions which have very little merit. And, the people who, the scientists who are studying this need to stand up and they need to point to the activists and say, these guys are over exaggerating stuff. And that's the real science I want to see, because, like I said, I'm not against people believing in it. I'm not against scientists saying they think it happens, or it is happening. I am against people being quiet while other people claim that their research is spelling out death to mankind when it really isn't. And so that's all I have to say on it, and hope you start thinking more for yourself and enjoy this video. Goodbye.